All right. Well, it's
All right,
11
looks like.
o'clock.
Go right ahead, Eric.
What?
Sorry.
No worries. It's 11 o'clock. Why don't we go ahead and kick off? Um, so the topic of our talk today is zero trust. It's entitled "Never Trust, Always Verify: A Practical Zero Trust Starting Point." Um, Moving into some introductions. My name is Eric Devansky. I'm the manager of Cybersecurity Services, and I'll hand it over to Dave.
Hey, everybody. I'm Dave Edminster. I'm the practice director for Cybersecurity Services here. And that means that I'm responsible for a lot of the all of the security architecture, security engineering, and AppSec engineering that we perform here at EVOTEK. And like Eric, I'm very happy to entertain you all here today and talk about the subject of zero trust in greater depth.
Awesome. So let's just jump right in, shall we? So a common question we get is, what is zero trust? Zero trust is a security model that assumes that there's no implicit trust and requires verification at every access attempt into your environment. A theme you'll see throughout this presentation: never trust, always verify. So where did zero trust come from? The concept originated from the recognition that traditional security models, which operated on a premise that you secure your border and everything inside of your organization's network can be trusted, was becoming increasingly inadequate. This is due to a number of factors: a distributed workforce, in moving into cloud environments, and really sophisticated attack vectors that we're seeing. So this model really doubles into the never trust, always verify at all times in your environment.
Mhm. And it's worth noting in many ways, briefly too, that the concept of zero trust has changed over the years since its introduction. Zero trust is not a one static thing. It's not like we're going to go into here. It's a lot of things that it isn't, a number of things that it is, which we'll be talking about here in length.
Absolutely. Thanks for adding on to that, Dave. It really is a holistic approach. But zero trust is one of those things. If we ask 10 different people in our roles as consultants advising our clients on their zero trust journey, what is zero trust? We get 10 different answers. And so to kick off, I wanted to dispel some myths. Zero trust is not a single tool or application. There's no silver bullet here. It's a defined methodology and approach. It's not a control framework. You're not going to be able to go down a list and check a couple of boxes and make a couple changes in your environment and see compliance with zero trust principles. You won't get there overhauling identity services. As much as I like to think that you can, identity is only a small part of the zero trust journey, and we'll go into that a little bit later. It's not unique to a single environment, be it cloud on-premise or a SaaS-based solution. And it won't replace your existing security program. It's meant to add on.
Yeah, and just to double down on what Eric was saying there too, we see this frequently, both as consultants and in our lives in the actual client side of the fence here, that there is no single thing that will get you zero trust. We're often asked, or we'll see conversations out there, what tool do I get that will achieve zero trust? And just to double down on that particular one, there is no one tool, there is no one solution that is going to do it. It's an amalgamation, it's a program, it's an architecture, it's many things. And that's a big part of why the better together concept that Richard was mentioning in the kickoff for the summit really is a factor in zero trust architecture and in methodology. You're going to have to approach it from a number of ways. You're going to need a number of tools, a number of solutions, a number of different architectural approaches to achieve an improved zero trust posture.
And I appreciate that you brought that up, Dave, because we call it out right here. It's a holistic approach that encompasses technology, processes, and people. All of these elements come together to form your zero trust journey, and obviously they're all better together. Zero trust also was a pivotal shift from traditional perimeter-based approach to a comprehensive framework that covers all those users, devices, and resources in the environment. It was a concept coined in 2010 by John Kindervag after seeing that traditional security models were not effective in the face of modern threats. And as organizations pivot and shift their data to the cloud and to SaaS providers, attacks become more complex. And so zero trust is really gaining a lot of popularity as a model in recent times.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting too that again, this concept's been around since 2010, but we've seen significant increase in interest in a need for a zero trust approach in recent years. So it's been 14 years that the concept of zero trust has been around. It's been evolving the entire time since John actually coined it and actually proposed it as a concept. And in the last roughly 2 years, I'd say 3 years, there's a much bigger interest in what zero trust is. Part of it's buzzword, and we see a lot of marketecture out there from a great many providers as to how to achieve zero trust. But the reality is that there's a much more significant need for a stronger zero trust approach in any business, in any organization today. Not the least of all is because of ransomware attacks, and then the COVID crisis that struck the world here and distributing our workforce to a very remote workforce forced a very rapid shift, as we all very well know, into that remote workforce, and the concept of how do you better secure a remote workforce when many organizations weren't ready for that. They were taking a slow approach or no approach to it, suddenly had to do it. Zero trust actually translates very well conceptually into supporting a remote workforce, but you've got to have the technologies, the procedures, the policies, and the architecture to do it well.
Absolutely. And Dave, I really appreciate that you mentioned the ransomware example specifically. That's still front of mind for a number of our clients in our industry. And that ability to, with zero trust, especially around the network pillar and a lot of the network controls around segmentation and things like that we'll get into later, really can have a strong impact on limiting the lateral movement of ransomware inside of an environment. So one example of that, trust but verify.
Absolutely. And briefly trying to dovetail off what you're saying there, Eric, is the approach with zero trust is often assume breach. And that isn't to say assume that you have a breach, but assume that somewhere, somehow, a bad actor is going to get a foothold somewhere in your organization. So with that assumption in mind, the idea with zero trust is to mitigate that lateral movement, like you were just saying, Eric. If they get a foothold into a particular part of the organization, how do you prevent the damage from really spreading? How do you prevent them from really weaponizing even more, discovering more, and you minimize the effect of a potential breach or a security incident within your organization?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very powerful stuff that, there's a lot of benefit in our industry and to our clients from this framework.
Absolutely.
All right. So moving in, I wanted to share, I really like this slide because it points out, we'll be looking at three models today, and it really points out the difference between the Microsoft Zero Trust Security Model and the NIST Special Publication 800-207, which is more of a published architecture and guidance. Microsoft tends to take more of an objective approach, saying, that there should be ultimate objectives to a zero trust implementation: securely working from anywhere, safeguarding most critical assets, modernizing your security posture, minimizing the impact of bad actors, going back to our ransomware example from our previous slide, and getting ahead of regulatory requirements. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, takes a bit more of a technical approach to that. That all data and computing services should be considered resources. Everything from a communication standpoint, be it in transit or at rest, should be encrypted and secured. Communication secured at all levels across the organization. Access to individual resources is granted on a per session basis. Access, the enterprise monitors, and we'll get into this in a little bit more detail later, but they monitor the integrity and the security posture of all owned associates and assets. And resources are authenticated on the platform, and the enterprise collects as much information kind of feeding into that security visibility that's a pivotal cornerstone of zero trust.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting too that one, there isn't any regulatory component addressing zero trust today, not from the federal government, not the US government, not any kind of industry regulatory requirements. Everything around zero trust today that's coming down from a requirements perspective is a recommendation. It's a high level component where it's basically any kind of organization is being told you should do something with zero trust. And part of the reason that it isn't something more prescriptive, it isn't more specific yet, is that zero trust can be achieved in any myriad of ways. There is no one particular way to get a zero trust architecture to improve your zero trust posture. So partly I think that's because it's complex and there's a lot of components in there. And every industry realizes that there's a need for this, but there is no silver bullet in prescriptively saying how to achieve this. So in my opinion, that's a big part of why you'll see these different kinds of objective tenets and frameworks that will come out around zero trust. They're ultimately driving towards the same thing, but they'll be doing it in a different prescriptive way. NIST obviously is very prescriptive. That's what NIST is and what NIST always has been. So you'll see more detail in NIST, but that doesn't make Microsoft's approach wrong. Microsoft might be more conceptual about it, etc. So my point here is that regardless of what approach you take to zero trust, it's good to start working towards zero trust. You can mix and match components, obviously based on your industry, on your business, on your needs, and then highlighting what areas you need to focus on or might be easy wins in terms of zero trust. So thanks for listening to me pontificate about this. It's just that we'll get a lot of questions about what framework do I follow to achieve zero trust? And unfortunately, there's not a simple answer to that.
And that's, that really dovetails into a lot of the complexities with this. But often we find that, it comes down to the customer striking their own journey and understanding, not only what the frameworks are, to Dave's point, but also understanding what the requirements are inside of the organization and how to best align changes where they'll have the biggest impact. Ultimately, this is a journey, not a checkbox.
Yeah. And double downing on what you're saying, Eric, it's a journey and it's not a destination, because the destination is ultimately always moving away from you. It's always changing. Everybody who's worked in security and in infrastructure and in IT, we all know that the landscape is changing all the time. So there is no achieve it, check the box, deploy the technology, say you're done, because there is no done. And so I don't want to be daunting about it, but just keep in mind, it's always going to be a journey. There's always going to be revisions. There's always going to be change.
Absolutely. Ever-evolving threats require ever-evolving defense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. So moving past this, this slide really pulls together some of the alignment of zero trust into various pieces and facets of an organization. And we kind of aligned optimal state for things like data protection, least privilege access, automation orchestration, identity verification, etc. This slide really is meant to spawn some conversation around the various elements of zero trust. And when Dave and I were running through this presentation, we had a great conversation about security awareness and training, and how this often underappreciated facet of an organization's security program really has such a strong impact into the zero trust program. Dave, would you like to share a couple thoughts around that?
Yeah, so there's an interesting part where when you look at the zero trust components, there's a number of pillars, which we'll show here later, that are often where you're driving your zero trust initiatives in terms of categorization. But something that we feel that gets overlooked on the regular is the awareness training component. And we've all been through a number of phishing trainings in our life, different solutions trying to help educate ourselves and our user base about how to identify malicious activity, what not to do, etc. It can get tedious. But I wanted to double down on the importance of that training in a zero trust initiative, because there's information still today that roughly 80%, 70 to 80% of all data breaches and incident compromise activity involves user account takeover in some way, involves phishing, for example. So your user base often is the target. We all know that. We've done it for years, that the social engineering attacks and the somewhat technical and manipulative attacks against our user base can be the foothold. And if zero trust is deployed well in an organization, one, it should limit the damage in the event of an account takeover like that. That's one of the goals. But even outside of the technical controls that zero trust can help bring, there's the user education and the user understanding around how to behave, not behave, that can, in fact, I think, work into a zero trust program reasonably well. Because we all know that the users are part of the attack surface now. And technical controls have a very challenging time limiting user compromise and user behavior, be it phishing, be it installing unwanted applications, malicious applications. And here, briefly, I'll talk about this one as briefly as I can. I have seen in my career times where individual employees with an organization have had an account takeover where their work email was compromised. That work email was then used to change credentials within a payroll system, for example, and then make a change into direct deposit information so that their paycheck literally went to a bad actor when next it got processed. Or they use that email to communicate with HR requesting a direct deposit change, and HR, being helpful, works with what they think is a legitimate user. And again, the result is a paycheck is lost. Strictly speaking, if that happens through user action, and this is going to vary from organization to organization, but strictly speaking, an organization could deny fixing that, if you will, and making it right to the actual employee. And it gets very messy. It gets very heated. People are understandably upset. But it's an interesting connection there that I found, that by knowing this and educating our users that they have skin in the game, that they may personally have something to lose. It's not just the business that's at risk. It's them personally. It's their money that may be at risk. That actually I find helps engage users in the education perhaps more seriously and taking it more severely. So thanks for joining me down that rabbit hole around this and how that aligns to zero trust. And that's just a highlight of where I think that training can really help in a overall zero trust effort within an organization.
And I really like that positioning. When a security incident affects an individual, and an individual's paycheck, it becomes real in a certain sense, because it's you're shifting from, it's just some corporate data to, hey, this is my pay. And when we look at the other elements of zero trust, things like the identity verification at each stage in the system, the segmentation to limit blast radius, you really see how this all the facets of this come together with the end user in mind to help, build an overarching umbrella of protection across the environment.
Yeah, when you have that right architecture, when you have the better tools in place, one, it should help greatly reduce the likelihood of an account being taken over when you have, say, single sign-on and MFA tools in place. And then in the event that it is, what kind of other user education is there, and technical means for, say, data loss prevention technology from something being exfiltrated, from interactions with HR, et cetera, et cetera. So having a zero trust across not just your own architecture and then the education of your user base, but even your third-party integration, SaaS tools, et cetera. Zero trust approaches that too, because that's still part of your critical operating environment. Those SaaS tools that may be third party, having zero trust apply to them also helps mitigate the damage that can be done in the event of a breach or compromise.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, before we move on, we have a question here from Lainey. How do you ensure security initiatives are aligned with the business when determining the priority of the objectives that zero trust can achieve?
That's a really, really good question, Lainey, and thank you for asking it. And I'd say at first blush here, it's obviously going to change from organization to organization. I think it's helpful to have an analysis of what technologies you have in place helping achieve zero trust today. And then you can find those gaps. Are there very large gaps organizationally? Say it's within network segmentation, say it's data loss prevention. There may be a number of findings there where an organization can mature their zero trust posture, of course. And I think cross-referencing that with, are there technologies that the organization already owns that can help achieve that? Perhaps there are features in a technology that just have not been implemented yet. Is it as simple as, and we all know it's not really simple, but is it as simple as turning on a feature, checking a box or a button in a solution to help achieve that, configuring it, et cetera? Then it may be acquiring a new technology that actually helps achieve that. That, I think, can be cross-referenced with easy wins, if you will. What are some low-hanging fruit to help shore up your security posture and your zero trust stance faster? And then what are some longer-term initiatives like network segmentation and preventing east-west movement within an organization using firewalls? That may and probably will require new firewalls, potentially re-architecting your network. That may be a much bigger lift, but there could be a roadmap then that is generated from that, knowing that when we next do a network refresh or an upgrade of these technologies, we should also factor in some firewalls in terms of our network segmentation. So it's going to be, like I said, different for every organization, in my opinion, but it really is finding, what do you have today that can be leveraged? What are the big glaring gaps? Are there some easy wins? What's the financial tolerances for some of these new acquisitions or changes? Eric, that was a lot for me to say at once, but I certainly want to make sure you've got a chance to opine on this as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you hit all the nails on the head. Road mapping and building out where we are and where we're trying to go, and having the business aligned with that and with that mission and vision. And then there's all kinds of regulatory and other considerations that we can map on top of that. If while this is not a regulatory framework, if there's an external regulatory requirement to align to principles of zero trust, we can get that out of the way and then start to build on top of that toward a foundational program.
Absolutely. And you can also help with, from the financial point of view, like what's the cost of doing any of these kind of changes of new technologies, and then referencing that on, what's the cost of a breach, which, we do talk about a lot, but framing it up to your leadership and executive advisory in that sense, your executive team, about what's important and why, especially if you've had any kind of security concerns. If there's something that's happened in the environment that's raised concern already, it may be a good time to talk with your leadership around those things and start discussing how to make this better, how to improve your posture to prevent things in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, we have another question here. So David asks, how could organizations ensure the effective implementation of zero trust principles when dealing with legacy systems and applications that were not designed with security in mind? I'll take a first pass at this. I really believe architecturally the principles of zero trust are rooted in the principles of a standard, a standard secure network operating environment. And so to really address that concern, I like to look at the standard playbook for how you would secure an insecure system that wasn't necessarily built that way. And the principles that I like to lean on for this are the concept of service isolation. How do you isolate this from the broader network? How do you control access through a secure host, be it a bastion host or a VDI or something else? And how do you control the inputs and outputs to that segmented system? So I would tackle that architecturally, really looking at the standard forms of architecture that we can use to secure a insecure asset. But Dave, I'd love your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I agree entirely with what you said there. I still look at it as an architectural approach in many ways. The service or system isolation, being very prescriptive about what traffic can or cannot reach those services, those applications, those legacy devices inside the organization, and doing inspection on them too, because many of them, say it was something legacy DNS, for example, having actual inspection of just the DNS traffic, that's all that's allowed, for example. And that deep inspection is actually a part that actually is helping understand or analyze, not only is this traffic on the allowed port, but is this traffic actually meant to be DNS? And it can start to actually understand, the next generation firewalls can start to actually analyze and determine that that doesn't look like DNS traffic, start to report it, block it potentially, and at least get logging and alerting into a SIM system. So much like Eric was saying, there's a defense in depth approach and a prescriptive approach towards isolating those legacy services, applications, et cetera, in a way that they obviously still need to function because they're still there for a reason, but let's limit the actual blast radius and the ability for something to compromise it, or in the event that it is compromised, for it to be used as a launch point to target other infrastructure within the organization.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. All right. So moving in, let's talk about how your organization builds a zero trust program and how we start to build on these concepts that we've discussed. So the transition to zero trust, I really like to look at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, the CISA Zero Trust Maturity Model, because it defines a lot of those elements of the roadmap, where we're going, and how do we get there. So the model really breaks down an organization's cybersecurity practices across 4 maturity stages and 5 technology pillars critical to the establishment of a zero trust program. With that said, the CISA model emphasizes that zero trust is a journey, that there is no magic bullet, there is no tool, as we've discussed. So it's a granular process and a gradual process that involves multiple stages across various domains in the organization. But the strategy is baked in. And, this really speaks back to Laney's question earlier, because you kind of identify the areas that need that improvement and that uplift and strategically plan their advancement in implementing zero trust principles as you start to build out the program and as you start to build out adherence with zero trust architecture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
go ahead, Eric. Sorry, I was going to.
No,
please. More. That was it.
So this is just a graphic that I like to drop into this presentation, really highlighting what those pillars are: identity, devices, networks, applications, and workloads and data. And these are the pillars that'll traverse up the cybersecurity and the CISA maturity model for zero trust. But just highlighting and bucketing those individual elements of your program, and then really determining the maturity around that.
Mm-hmm. And these pillars are broad in that sense. Things can be in certainly one pillar. Sometimes they span multiples in there. But the big I think for me, a zero trust approach is really identifying where in these pillars can Zero Trust be improved upon or implemented for the first time, perhaps? We've talked a fair amount about network segmentation as one of the core components of a Zero Trust approach. Obviously, that's within network, but data and devices can be part of that too, in the sense of where your devices live. For example, remote workforce, where your devices are out at homes or other places within the world here, but they're still interacting with your key applications, your core infrastructure, et cetera. How do you secure that? Well, there's going to be a network component into that. But there are other technologies that actually can layer on top of those components here to help achieve a Zero Trust approach. And very briefly, identity is one of the core pillars here. And something that we felt pretty strongly about here is that identity has become and will remain for some time the new crown jewels within the organization. The identity services and the accounts themselves, that's the way many bad actors are able to gain access, move laterally, elevate privileges, and continue to compromise or spread in an organization in the event of a breach. So identity security, it's always been important, but we really see a double down effort and effect going on here around identity as it relates to Zero Trust.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when we take a better look at the maturity model, to use your identity example, we can look at the 5 pillars of technology and the 4 pillars of maturity. And we can see that, in a traditional model, passwords or MFA with on-premise identity stores makes all the sense in the world. When we move up through the different maturity models here and we get to optimal, we see that we're performing, not only your standard password and, multi-factor authentication, but you're also layering on top of that continuous risk validation, enterprise-wide identity validation and integration, and tailored as needed and necessary automation for access. So you're really streamlining the process while also limiting the access and really validating that user in real time at every facet of integrating with the system.
Yeah, and I think coupling that with just-in-time access and privilege escalation and account differentiation, those kind of identity controls can really help mitigate, 1, compromise, and 2, lateral spread in the event of a breach.
Absolutely. And I know we're getting a little short on time, but David has another question here I want to call out.
Yeah.
Considering the growing complexity of supply chain attacks, can you explain how a Zero Trust architecture can mitigate the risk of third-party breaches and what strategies can be employed to ensure trustworthiness across the ecosystem?
It's a great question, David, and you continue to pepper us with great questions here, so thank you for that. My first pass at that really is that you've got the third-party application and zero, compromise risk. We actually even see fourth-party compromise now, where something within a third-party partner ecosystem could be the source of attack in a supply chain sense. So as Zero Trust relates to it, I think a lot of it rolls back to the never trust, always verify that Eric mentioned at the very beginning, is minimizing what activity and what connectivity you have with, say, a third-party resource. The due diligence that one should perform either before deploying a third-party solution, be it SaaS or a third-party solution within your on-prem ecosystem, really evaluating them for what their security stance is, what their security features are, and being diligent about it. It's a challenge, to do yourself or have another partner do it, perform with you. But getting that information really holds them accountable. Do you have good security in your own third-party ecosystem? Do you as a vendor do a good job on this? What are your certifications and assessments? Are you compliant in these number of areas? And then in turn, we started to press a number of our own partners around fourth party, what we're calling fourth party. Have our third party vendor, do you have third party analysis going on around what you're using in your ecosystem, et cetera? So Zero Trust can conceptually help facilitate those kind of security posture improvements by holding them accountable, by really getting into the weeds with them about what they're doing. Because if they don't have good answers for you from a security perspective, you might want to reevaluate using that third party if you can. And we all know about like the SolarWinds breach from a supply chain perspective. Once it's happened, you obviously have to make responses. But when you think about it, there's items and resources of a third party either in your ecosystem or interacting. It's trying to limit that interaction to just what they need to, be it API, be it on-prem, be it network, be it the security applications that you may be running in parallel and analysis. It's a defense in depth approach. And again, that's where the better together concept, I think, dovetails nicely into this whole narrative. Eric, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very glad that you touched on the kind of the segmentation and the network control piece. Limiting the blast radius, and not only limiting that from a network and a logical perspective, but also from a data and access perspective. Segmenting off the data that your third parties have access to, and limiting that in your typical manners. From an architectural standpoint, really is a great compensating and mitigating control around how to secure those relationships and how to ensure that if there is a breach from a third or even a fourth party, that blast radius is minimized as much as possible.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. That proper preparation should help mitigate the damage in the event that something occurs, even via a third party breach or supply chain compromise.
Absolutely. Well, I believe we're at time, but I'd like to thank everybody for attending our session today and for the thoughtful and insightful questions. Please feel free to reach out for any questions or any other additional information we can provide on your Zero Trust journey.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, everybody.
Thank you.